For the past month, my Sony A1 and Canon R3 have been on a little vacation because I have only been using the Z9 for all of my photography and video that I do for this channel. And I want to talk about the things that I liked and some of the things that I don't like. With every fiber of my being, I tried so hard not to buy the Z9. I'm already fully invested in Sony, partially invested in Canon. It doesn't make sense. Nikon doesn't even have a large amount of third-party lenses that I can choose from, so it's gonna be an expensive thing to do. But see, the thing is, I got to test the Z9 out at Imaging USA with Dan Watson. I liked it so much, I ended up purchasing it with the 28-75 and the Viltrox 85-18. I mainly justified this purchase because the Z9 has a feature that neither my Sony A1 or Canon R3 have. It's what we call a dirty HDMI out. You can record the EVF using a small recorder like the Ninja Star while not losing access to the EVF. So this doesn't black out. So I can use the EVF while I'm recording all the data inside here. Whereas with Sony and Canon, I'm gonna have to hook up that much larger Ninja V, and then my EVF gets disabled. So it's just it's a miserable way of shooting. Since I post mostly photography tutorials, I think it's a very valuable teaching tool because I'm able to show those visual learners out there like me exactly what's going on in the camera. Most of y'all will never use that feature, but we all find a way to justify a purchase, right? Well, that was it. To be honest, I was skeptical around the hype that surrounded the Z9. I thought it was gonna still share those AF quirks of the Z7, Z7 II, but I was very wrong. A month in and the autofocus is so much smarter, so much more predictable than the previous Z cameras, and very similar to the Canon R3 and the Sony A1. And for this past month, I integrated the Z9 into my normal workflow, meaning I wasn't using this camera just for the sake of testing it. All right, so we're gonna start off with some of the bad. I had an issue with the IBIS in the camera. So when I was shooting B-roll for another video that I'm doing for Loop Deck, I put the Z9 on my Rhino slider, and then I noticed something weird happening. It was almost like the footage was like doing some kind of Shakira hip thrust when the camera was panning. Now, to me, it looked like the IBIS was like overcompensating or trying to stabilize the footage when it didn't need it. I called Nikon about it and they just told me to turn the IBIS off, and that's fair. I don't need IBIS for a slider shot, but at the same time, there's always like the little micro jitters when using a motorized slider like the Rhino. I've never seen this happen to any of my Sony or Canon cameras. IBIS on, IBIS off. I never had to change that setting for it. So I did the same slider move with the A1 and the R3, both with only IBIS on, just to show y'all that this is something that's not normal. I even tried it in sport mode and with the electronic VR on and off, all the combinations. And I found that turning off IBIS and then only leaving on the electronic VR, despite the crop, it worked better while on the slider. The good thing is that it rarely happens doing handheld or even gimbal shots. And even if it does, it's not very noticeable. As for the slider shots, I always use warp stabilizer to remove the jitters in Final Cut, and that usually does an amazing job. It also pretty much corrected the Z9 IBIS hip thrust, but a slight wobble is still present. Overall, I don't think this is a big deal. Turning IBIS off does solve the issue for me. But when I noticed Shakira jerking the footage randomly while the camera was perfectly still, I don't know, I felt like I had to say something about it. Is this something to worry about, or is this a non-issue? You tell me in the comments. Ergonomics and the handling of the Z9 is why I kind of fell in love with it. I think the Z9 feels better in the hand than the other cameras, even though it is the heaviest. For me, aesthetics matter. Think about how many people shoot Fuji because of the way the camera looks. Personally, I am a huge fan of the boxy shape of the Z9. I love that the Z9's buttons light up when it gets dark, especially here in the studio. I love the rear screen quality. That weird hinge design, it's actually growing on me. It's perfect for vertical shooting, and if I hold the camera far out in front of me for handheld B-roll, the screen extends so far out, it makes it easy to see what I'm doing. Unlike other mirrorless cameras, the Z9 allows you to change the volume of the artificial shutter sound. The only negative part of owning a large camera like the Z9 for me is the same with the R3. They don't fit in any of my camera bags with the lens attached. Usability. Honestly, the R3 and the A1 are much more user-friendly cameras, meaning you can take them out of the box and start using them without getting lost in the menu. The Z9 is by far the more complicated camera out of the three. To be fair, I don't have as much experience with Nikon cameras, so I guess this could be seen as subjective. But after I pick up a Canon camera after using the Z9, I can really appreciate the simplicity and organization of the menu system. For example, when I was using a Z9 for video, I wanted to adjust the AF speed, so I went into the video recording menu. I saw a couple of AF settings there, but it was not what I was looking for. Then I went to the custom settings menu and looked in the focus tab. There are a ton of options, but still not there. Then I went to the video tab at the very bottom and I found it in that one. Something like this should be in the main video recording tab. With Canon and Sony, anything you need for autofocus will be in the autofocus tab and not scattered around everywhere. It's still a fun camera to use. It just takes a little bit more time to learn where everything is at. My experience with the autofocus, well, to be fair, I am a portrait photographer. I'm not using all of the different modes. I'm mostly in auto area or wide area, and I let the camera find the subject in the eye for me. And for what I do, I found that the Z9 is just as good as my Sony and Canon. I think that if I were to put them through some kind of AF torture test, I would find little things that each camera can do better than the other. Now, for example, I can argue right now to you that the Canon R3 is probably has the most sophisticated autofocus out of the three. But at the same time, something like touch tracking on the Z9, I found it to be more sticky, more reliable than the R3 when doing video. The Z9 also has better, more aggressive eye detection autofocus. It being able to find the eye sooner and from a longer range than the Canon and even the Sony. But at the same time, the Z9 sometimes finds eyeballs where there aren't any. The subject detection of the Z9 can be a little glitchy and jittery. It often misidentifies objects, like here when it thinks that it's identifying human eyeballs, and it gives me the option to switch over to the other eye. I turned subject detection off and then it stopped doing that. It doesn't negatively affect my shooting experience in any way, but that's kind of the beauty of having access to all the flagship cameras. I'm able to notice little things like this. When it comes to the image quality of the Z9, to no surprise, I thought the files looked great. I do appreciate how the Z9 allows you to shoot photos in high efficiency RAW, cutting the file size in half to about 25 megabytes. That's what I used for my long exposure portrait tutorial that I posted here on YouTube last week, and I had no issues with color grading or correcting the exposure of the images. I almost feel like it's pointless comparing the image quality of these top tier cameras because they're all so good. I still might do one though, because people seem to really like that kind of content on YouTube. The Z9 versus R5 versus A1 with 51.2s. That's coming soon. After 1 month with the Z9, I think $5,500 for this level of camera with this amount of features, especially when it gets its AK60 update, is absolutely crazy. I'm really loving it so far, and this might become my dedicated studio camera. The thing is that it's hard comparing the Z9 to the R3 and A1 because not one of them is the best in everything. The dilemma I face now is, should I keep investing in this system? The third-party options are very limited. They still don't have the f1.4 glass, and I'm just not a fan of their lens design. I know that might sound petty. I've used most of their f1.8 primes. They perform amazing, but the design is boring and uninspiring to me. You know, I kind of wish they brought back the gold ring from the F mount. I mean, I even purchased my first Viltrox lens ever, just because I'm not a fan of like the 85mm black tube design. I don't know, I know lenses are tools, but I also care about the aesthetics. And that they absolutely nailed with the Z9 body. Think about how many people shoot to shoot. Oh, yeah. There is Z9 for the entire. I think that for the past month, that might not. So we're gonna start off with some of the bad, okay? All right, so the beauty of being able, if I could ever imagine what a nerd is doing in their wet dream, they are probably scrolling through the Z9 menu. Look at this super ghetto setup that I have here. This is like, it was like 20 minutes of setup just for one shot. I'm gonna tap on Nikon, then press record. And then I'm gonna go to the background. I'm gonna just shake it a little bit, create like waves in the background.